My name is Madison, and I'm 35 years old. If you had met me just a few weeks ago, you would have found someone living a simple, quiet life, maybe even an invisible one to most people. I work as a librarian at the Havensburg Public Library, a job I've loved since I was a teenager. Books were my sanctuary growing up, and now I help children find the same kind of safety in stories that I once did. I live in a modest home on the east side of town with my husband Mark and our 13-year-old son, Alex. Mark works long hours in finance, and while our marriage hasn't always been perfect, we've done our best to build a stable life for Alex. He's the light of my world, smart, kind, and full of curiosity. He's the kind of kid who asks questions about how things work or why some people are kind while others aren't. I never imagined he'd soon be forced to understand the dark answers to those questions firsthand.
It was a sunny Tuesday in May.
The kind of day where sunlight poured into the library's children's section, casting golden streaks across the bookshelves. I was in the middle of reading The Secret Garden aloud to a small group of third graders when my phone began to vibrate on the desk beside me. The screen flashed Mark's name. I hesitated. Mark rarely called during work hours, and when he did, it was usually important. I held up a finger to the kids. Hang tight, little explorers. I'll be right back. Stepping into the hallway, I answered the call. Mark's voice was tight, his tone lower than usual. Mom wants us at the estate. She said it's important. Immediately, my stomach clenched. By Mom, he meant Grace Lancaster, my mother-in-law. A powerful, sharp-tongued woman who ruled over her mansion on Willow Street like a queen in a fortress. In the 13 years I'd been married to her son, Grace had made one thing painfully clear. I would never be good enough for the Lancaster name. She looked down on me for being a librarian, called me quaint at family dinners, and always made subtle remarks about how I was lucky Mark had married me at all. All right, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'll head there after I pick up Alex from school. I hung up, but the weight of the conversation stayed with me. After my shift ended, I drove to Havensburg Middle School to pick up Alex. He was waiting by the school gate, his backpack hanging from one shoulder, hair a little tousled from pee. When he saw me, he waved but quickly noticed something was off. "You okay, Mom?" he asked as he climbed into the car. I tried to smile. "We just need to make a quick stop before going home." "Where to?" he asked, buckling his seatbelt. I hesitated, then sighed. "Your grandmother's house." Alex's face dropped. Oh, I couldn't blame him. Grace had never been warm toward him. While most grandmothers adore their grandkids, Grace treated Alex like a distant obligation, if she acknowledged him at all. She once told Mark in front of me, "He's been library raised." That's not the same as being raised properly. It took every ounce of restraint I had not to scream. The drive to Willow Street was silent. As we pulled up to the massive black iron gates, the towering Victorian mansion loomed ahead, its stained glass windows reflecting the fading afternoon light. Already in the driveway was a sleek black sports car, Julia's. "Great," Alex muttered. "She's here too." Julia, Mark's younger sister, was practically a copy of her mother, cold, polished, and overflowing with arrogance. She worked in luxury real estate and never missed a chance to flaunt her wealth or humiliate me in subtle ways. Every interaction with her was like walking barefoot across broken glass. I reached over and gave Alex's hand a gentle squeeze. "Let's just get through this." The front door swung open before I could even knock. Julia stood there, arms crossed, wearing a dress that probably cost more than our entire living room. "Well," she smirked, "the peasants have arrived." I smiled politely. "Good to see you too, Julia." And with that, Alex and I stepped into a house where we were never truly welcome, unaware that within days, it would become the center of a scandal so explosive, none of us would ever be the same again. The Lancaster estate always felt like a museum, too perfect to touch, too cold to feel like home. Ornate chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, and antique furniture sat in stiff, calculated positions. As Alex and I walked through the grand foyer, the silence was as thick as velvet. No warmth, no welcome, just walls that had seen more control than compassion. We followed Julia into the formal sitting room, where Grace was already waiting, seated like a queen on a cream velvet armchair. Her posture was immaculate, her expression unreadable. Mark sat quietly on a nearby sofa, looking tense, his fingers laced together as if bracing for something. Eric, Julia's fiancé, was also there, calm but distant. Something about his eyes told me he didn't fully want to be part of whatever this meeting was about. "You're late," Grace said without looking at me. "I was at work," I replied, keeping my tone even. She let out a soft, disapproving sound. "Of course. The library."
As if it were a place of shame.
Julia dropped her handbag on the couch and sat beside Eric, already bored with our presence. Grace reached forward toward the ornate coffee table and slowly opened a small velvet box, sitting at the center. The room seemed to exhale as the lid lifted. Inside was a stunning emerald choker necklace, its stones deep green and glowing under the chandelier's light. The antique gold links shimmered with age and value. I felt Alex shift beside me, his curiosity piqued by the obvious importance of the moment. "This," Grace said smoothly, "is the Lancaster family heirloom." She let the words linger in the air, like incense at a ceremony. "It's been passed down through generations, worn only by the women in our family on the most important of occasions." Julia leaned forward, a smug smile curving on her lips. "It's worth over $100,000. And I'll be wearing it at my wedding." Of course. That's what this was about. I glanced at Mark, but he remained quiet, his eyes lowered. Eric, on the other hand, looked increasingly uneasy, his fingers tapping slowly on his knee. Grace shut the box with a soft snap, then turned her icy gaze toward Alex. "This necklace is not a toy," she said. "It's not something to be touched by careless hands." I felt Alex freeze beside me. I stood a little taller, my voice steady. Alex knows how to respect things that don't belong to him. He doesn't need a reminder. Grace's lips curled ever so slightly. "I would hope so. Temptation can be a dangerous thing." I wanted to scream. This wasn't about jewelry. It was another one of her condescending jabs, this time at my son. My 13-year-old boy who'd never once been anything less than kind, honest, and decent. "Come on, Mom," Alex whispered. I gave Grace one final look, then placed a hand on Alex's back. "We'll be at the church tomorrow," I said, more to Mark than anyone else. But Julia still had one last thing to say. "Try not to be late this time," she said with a smirk. "Wouldn't want you two missing my big moment." We turned and left the mansion without another word. Once in the car, I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Alex looked at me, his brow furrowed. "Why does Grandma hate us so much?" he asked softly. I swallowed the lump in my throat and gave the only answer I could manage. "Because we remind her of everything she can't control." As we pulled away from the iron gates of the Lancaster estate, neither of us knew that the very necklace we had just seen, so carefully guarded, so arrogantly displayed, would soon become the weapon used to try and destroy us. The next morning, sunlight filtered through stained glass windows as we arrived at St. Helena's Cathedral, one of Havensburg's most historic and opulent churches. It was the kind of place Grace had probably dreamed of for years. Tall archways, imported marble floors, and enough gold accents to make a palace feel insecure. Alex stood beside me in a pale blue dress shirt and blazer, adjusting his collar nervously. "Do you think she'll try something again?" he whispered. I smiled faintly and brushed a hand through his hair. "Let's just keep our heads down, sweetheart." We walked into the main hall, already filled with guests, lawyers, business magnates, and socialites Grace had undoubtedly spent years collecting like trophies. I recognized faces from newspapers and social media. Many of them nodded politely to me, though some barely acknowledged our presence. Mark was already seated near the front, and we joined him in silence. Grace hovered in and out of view, busy managing every inch of the ceremony like a royal coordinator. Julia, still out of sight, was said to be getting ready in the bridal suite. The cathedral buzzed with the sounds of live string music and muted conversation until a piercing scream shattered the atmosphere. "My necklace. It's gone." The music stopped instantly. Every guest froze. Then came frantic footsteps and hushed murmurs as heads turned toward the preparation room. Grace, Eric, Mark, and I rushed toward the source of the scream. Alex stayed close to me, his shoulders tense. Inside the bridal suite, Julia stood in front of a large vanity mirror, her makeup half done, her hands trembling in the air. The emerald choker necklace, the same one Grace had flaunted the day before, was nowhere in sight. "I put it right here," she cried, pointing to a silk-lined display on the dressing table. "I was fixing my veil. It was right here, and now it's gone." Gasps echoed. Grace's face went pale. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice tight. "I left it on this table," Julia snapped. "And someone took it." There was a moment of silence. Then Julia's eyes darted across the room and landed directly on Alex. "That child," she said, her voice sharp and cracking. "He was in here earlier. I saw him." My heart stopped. "What?" I whispered. Alex stepped back, his eyes wide with shock. I didn't take anything," but Julia was already pointing at him with a trembling hand. "He took it. I saw him near the door." Grace stepped forward, her voice low but deadly. "Is this true, Alex?" "No," Alex shouted, his voice breaking. "I swear I didn't touch anything." But the damage had begun. People were whispering. A woman in a sequined gown muttered, "Well, she's just a librarian." Another man added under his breath, "Those kinds of kids, they're always tempted." Mark stood frozen, torn between his mother and his family. I looked straight into Grace's eyes. "You know Alex wouldn't steal. He's 13. Grace crossed her arms. 13 is old enough to know the value of $100,000. My breath caught. How could they accuse a child so casually? But it wasn't over. Julia suddenly screamed, "Liar," and lunged forward. Before I could react, she grabbed a heavy porcelain vase from the vanity and smashed it down on Alex's head. The sound was sickening. The vase shattered. My son crumpled to the floor, blood beginning to trickle down his forehead. The room exploded in gasps and screams. "Julia!" Eric shouted. Mark pushed past the others and rushed to Alex's side. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he roared. "You just hit a child." I dropped to my knees beside my son, cradling his bleeding head. He whimpered, trembling in my arms. "Baby, I'm here. I've got you," I whispered, trying to keep my hands steady. "Call the police," Mark shouted.
Now.
No one moved, so he pulled out his phone and dialed himself.
Yes.
"I'd like to report an assault on a minor. We have evidence. The attacker is still on the scene." Julia backed away, her face wild. "She's lying. That brat took my necklace." But then, someone else finally spoke. "No, he didn't," Eric said quietly. All heads turned to him. "What?" Julia snapped. Eric took a deep breath, his face hard as stone. "I saw what really happened, and I have proof." Eric's voice cut through the chaos like a scalpel, quiet but undeniable. "I wasn't going to say anything," he continued, pulling his phone from the inside pocket of his tuxedo. "I figured we could deal with this after the wedding. But after what you just did, Julia, after you assaulted a child, you don't deserve my silence." Julia's mouth dropped open. "What are you talking about?" Eric ignored her. He unlocked his phone, tapped a few times, and then turned the screen toward the crowd gathering in the bridal suite. "This is from the cathedral's security feed. You'll want to watch this." The guests leaned in. The room fell silent. The video showed a timestamp from earlier that morning. Julia stood in front of the same vanity where the necklace had allegedly been stolen. She looked around nervously, then took the emerald choker out of its case and quickly shoved it into her designer handbag. Gasps erupted. Julia's face turned ghost white.
No.
"That's fake. That's doctored." Eric didn't flinch. "And now watch this." He let the video continue. Seconds later, Julia turned back toward the vanity, adjusted her veil in the mirror, and then screamed, the very scream we had all heard. It was staged, a performance. The entire theft was a lie. The guests murmured, horrified. "She planned it," someone whispered. Eric faced them. Julia wanted to fake the theft, file an insurance claim, and pocket the money. She's behind on her condo payments. She needed the cash. So she created a scapegoat. And she picked a child. All eyes turned toward Alex, who lay trembling in my arms, his shirt stained with blood. Julia's voice rose again, shrill and desperate. He still could have taken it. I mean, he had time. Maybe he found it and... Enough! Mark shouted, stepping in front of her. You hit my son in front of everyone. You lied to all of us. Julia took a step back. Mom. She turned toward Grace, pleading. Mom, say something. Grace remained silent. She looked at her daughter with tight lips and stone eyes. Mom, Julia cried again, her voice cracking. You're not going to let them do this to me, are you? Grace blinked slowly, but said nothing. At that moment, Detective Harris and a second officer stepped into the room, escorted by cathedral security. The police had arrived. Miss Julia Lancaster? Detective Harris said, stepping forward. Julia's panic shifted into full-blown hysteria. No, wait, you don't understand. You're under arrest for the assault of a minor, filing a false police report, and attempting to commit insurance fraud, he said, his voice calm but firm. He gestured to the other officer, who stepped behind Julia and pulled out a pair of handcuffs.
No.
You can't do this. I'm a Lancaster, she screamed as the officer cuffed her wrists. Her voice cracked again. Eric, help me. But Eric looked away. As she was led toward the door, Julia twisted her body, struggling. Emma, please. Grace flinched, but still said nothing. The guests stood in stunned silence as Julia's screams echoed through the halls of the cathedral. Detective Harris turned toward us. Is the boy all right? He asked, glancing at Alex. He needs medical attention, I said, my voice shaking. I'll call for paramedics, the second officer said, already speaking into his radio. Mark was on his knees beside me, gently brushing Alex's hair back from his blood-speckled forehead. You're going to be okay, son. I promise. Eric stepped forward, guilt shadowing his face. I should have come forward sooner. I nodded faintly. But you did, when it mattered. And then, as the officers prepared to take statements, the police radio crackled again. Dispatch to Detective Harris. Come in. He lifted his shoulder. Mike, Harris here. We have confirmation. Grace Lancaster is under investigation for financial fraud, including tax evasion and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Please detain for questioning. A collective gasp filled the air. Grace's expression, so regal, so composed, finally cracked. No, she whispered. This is ridiculous. I had nothing to do with that. Detective Harris turned toward her. Ma'am, you'll need to come with us. Grace's hands trembled. For a moment, she looked right at me, and in her icy blue eyes, I saw something I never thought I'd witness.
Fear.
She said nothing as the second officer gently took her by the arm and guided her out of the room, following the path her daughter had just been dragged down. The Lancaster women, once untouchable, were both gone. After Grace and Julia were escorted from the cathedral, the grand venue stood eerily still. The hush that had once signaled awe now carried a heaviness that no one knew how to break. The guests, once excited to witness an elite wedding, now stood stunned, exchanging nervous glances, murmurs, and shameful whispers. I sat on the floor beside Alex, my hands stained with his blood, gently pressing the edge of a cloth napkin someone had handed me to the cut on his head. His breathing was shallow, his eyelids fluttering, but he was conscious. Stay with me, baby, I whispered, brushing his cheek. You're going to be okay. Paramedics arrived moments later and quickly took over. They treated Alex at the scene, thankfully confirming the injury was not life-threatening. He would need stitches and rest, but he would be okay. Mark stayed by our side the entire time, his hands shaking with rage and guilt. I never imagined they'd go this far, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at him. You knew they were cruel, Mark. You've seen it for years. I know, he nodded, looking down. But I never thought they'd hurt Alex or frame him like that. Across the room, Eric stood quietly, giving a statement to Detective Harris. He kept glancing over at us. His guilt was clear, but so was his relief that the truth had finally come out. Detective Harris approached us next. "We'll be filing full charges today. Both Julia and Grace are in custody. The evidence is solid, thanks to the security footage and Eric's testimony." Mark nodded. "What happens next? They'll be arraigned tomorrow. It's likely to move quickly, given the public nature of this and the strength of the case. A trial is almost certain." I looked toward the cathedral's tall stained glass windows, the soft light filtering through in hues of gold and blue. What had started as a prestigious wedding had turned into a crime scene, and not because of a twist of fate, but because of a web of lies built over years. As the crowd began to thin, many guests avoided eye contact. Some left quietly, others whispered apologies or excuses as they passed us. It was clear, the Lancasters' power had collapsed in a single afternoon. And yet, through the ruins of the chaos, something stronger had risen: truth. Alex, now resting on a stretcher, reached for my hand. "Are they really going to jail?" he asked weakly. "Yes," I said softly. "They are. And we don't have to see them again?" "No," Mark said firmly, his jaw tight. "Not ever again." He placed a protective arm around me and Alex. For the first time in a long while, he chose us, clearly, completely, and publicly. As the paramedics wheeled Alex outside, Mark and I walked on either side of him, heads high. There were no more shadows to hide in. No more apologies to make. Eric caught up to us before we reached the parking lot. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I should have stopped Julia the moment she suggested it. I never imagined she'd go this far." I looked him in the eye. "You showed the truth when it mattered. That's what counts now." He nodded slowly, then turned and walked back inside, his engagement, his reputation, his place in that family now in pieces. As for us, we drove straight to the hospital. Alex was treated, stitched up, and discharged later that night. As I tucked him into his bed at home, I leaned in and kissed his forehead. "I'm proud of you," I whispered. "For being brave, for telling the truth, and for surviving all of it." He gave me a tired smile. "I just wanted you to believe me." "I always do," I said, holding his hand until he fell asleep. And in that quiet room, after a day filled with so much noise and damage, I knew that something irreversible had happened. The Lancaster name, once held high with pride, had finally fallen, and we, finally, could rise. The courtroom smelled of old wood and polished leather, and it buzzed with whispers as reporters and former Lancaster family associates filled the benches. The trial had become one of the most talked-about cases in Havensburg, not just because of the wealth involved, but because of the cruelty behind it. A 13-year-old boy, framed and assaulted in broad daylight. A matriarch who had enabled it all. I sat beside Mark in the front row, with Alex between us. His forehead had healed, but the scar was still fresh, both the physical one and the emotional one. I held his hand tightly, silently promising he would never face anything like this again. Across the room, Julia sat at the defendant's table, pale and twitching. Gone was the confident, smug real estate agent in designer heels. She looked exhausted, unkempt, and deeply unsettled. Her fingers tapped the wood in a frantic rhythm as her attorney leaned in to whisper to her. Beside her sat Grace, stoic and stone-faced as ever. But even her expensive blazer couldn't hide the defeat in her eyes. Her back was straighter than ever, but there was a tremor in her hands that betrayed her nerves. Judge Harper entered the courtroom, and everyone rose. She was a sharp woman in her early 60s, known for fairness and zero tolerance for lies. As she took her seat, the room fell silent. The prosecution wasted no time. First, they played the security footage again, Julia stuffing the emerald choker into her handbag, faking the scream, framing Alex. Then came witness testimony from me, Mark, Eric, and others who had seen the aftermath. Finally, the insurance investigator took the stand and explained how Julia had planned to file a fraudulent claim to cover her condo's unpaid mortgage and credit card debt. When asked if she had any statement before sentencing, Julia stood up shakily, eyes red and swollen. "This isn't fair," she snapped. "I'm a Lancaster. I don't belong in prison."
The courtroom gasped.
Judge Harper didn't flinch. "Miss Lancaster, your last name has no bearing in this courtroom. Your actions do. You planned a fraudulent crime, blamed a child, and struck him with a heavy object in a public setting. The evidence is undeniable." She turned to the bailiff. "The court finds Julia Lancaster guilty on all counts. Sentence: 6 years in state prison. $200,000 fine, with a significant portion ordered as compensation to Alex. Seizure of assets, including her condo, luxury items, and bank holdings." Julia screamed as she was cuffed by the bailiff.
Mom.
"Do something." Grace didn't even look at her. Then came the second trial, Grace Lancaster's. The prosecution presented years of financial records proving tax evasion, offshore accounts, and fraudulent filings. Then came testimony from a former Lancaster accountant, now a whistleblower, who revealed how Grace used her money to manipulate, threaten, and cover up crimes within her circle. Grace stood when asked if she had a final statement. "I regret nothing," she said coldly. "Everything I did was to protect my family's legacy." Judge Harper nodded slowly. "And in doing so, you destroyed it." Sentence: 8 years in federal prison. Full seizure of her estate, including the Lancaster mansion, investment accounts, and art collections. Permanent loss of her public trust positions and board seats. The courtroom echoed with murmurs. The once powerful Lancaster matriarch was officially powerless. As Grace was escorted out, she glanced back once. Her eyes met mine. For the first time in 13 years, she blinked first. I held Alex's hand tighter. The courtroom emptied, but we stayed behind for a moment. The judge had done her part. The truth had spoken. And justice had been served. 1 month after the sentencing, Havensburg had changed. The headlines that once praised the Lancaster name now painted it with disgrace. Wealth to ruin. The fall of the Lancaster legacy. 13-year-old framed. Justice prevails in stunning courtroom trial. Grace and Julia Lancaster sentenced in shocking choker fraud case. People who once scrambled for invitations to their parties now deleted photos and denied ever knowing them. The mansion on Willow Street was sealed, its gates locked, its legacy crumbled. But inside our small home on the east side of town, the world had never felt more still, more safe. Mark had taken a leave from work. He didn't say it outright, but I could tell he needed time to reconnect with us. And he did. He cooked breakfast with Alex, helped with homework, even took him hiking on the weekends. For the first time in a long time, he was present, not just as a father, but as a husband too. As for Alex, his recovery was nothing short of inspiring. The boy who once shrank in his grandmother's presence now walked taller, laughed more, and spoke with newfound confidence. The trauma hadn't broken him. It had revealed his strength. One quiet Wednesday afternoon, I returned to the library. The children's section looked exactly the same, but everything felt different. I stood near the shelf of classics, tracing my finger along the spine of Charlotte's Web, when a small group of children burst in through the side door, giggling and skipping. Among them was Alex, carrying a picture book. "Mom," he said, walking up with a grin, "can I do today's storytelling?" I blinked, surprised. "You want to read to the kids?" He nodded. "I know the perfect book." I stepped aside, letting him take my place on the little wooden stool in the reading circle. He opened the book, cleared his throat, and smiled at the crowd of expectant little faces. "Today's story," he began, "is called The Truth Always Comes Out." I stepped back and watched as sunlight poured through the tall library windows, casting a warm glow over Alex and the listening children. His voice was clear and strong, no fear, no hesitation. Just a brave boy telling a story. My eyes welled with tears, but not from sadness, from pride. This was our new beginning. Grace and Julia had taken their own downfall. In trying to ruin us, they had destroyed themselves. And while their world fell apart, ours had quietly come together, piece by piece.
We weren't wealthy.
We weren't powerful, but we were whole. And that, finally, was enough. Thank you for watching this powerful story. If it moved you, inspired you, or gave you something to think about. Please don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life inspired stories every week. Your support helps us continue to share voices that deserve to be heard.